Salt Lake City, June 5, 2002. A quiet night. A girl fast asleep in her own bed. Then, shadows moved. A knife pressed against her throat. At just 14 years old, Elizabeth Smart was dragged from her home, while her sister froze in silence, pretending to sleep just feet away. For 9 long months, Elizabeth was chained, starved, and forced to live in fear under the control of a self-proclaimed prophet and his wife. Every day was a fight to survive, every night a whisper of hopelessness. The world outside searched desperately, but no one could find her. This isn't fiction. This is real. A nightmare that gripped a nation. Subscribe now to @MysteryPlaybacksSeries and watch until the end to uncover the truth. Salt Lake City, Utah. June 5, 2002. It was a warm summer night, the kind that carries the smell of freshly cut grass and the faint hum of sprinklers in the distance. Inside the Smart family's home, the world felt safe. Edward and Lois Smart, proud parents of 6 children, had tucked their kids into bed. The quiet suburban neighborhood slept peacefully under a silver moon. But inside that silence, something sinister stirred. 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart lay asleep in her pink bedroom, sharing the space with her 9-year-old sister, Mary Catherine. Posters of ballerinas and soft pastel curtains painted the innocence of childhood. The world outside seemed far away. At 2 a.m., a creak of the window broke the stillness. A shadow slipped inside. A man, barefoot, carrying a knife. His face hidden beneath layers of disguise. He pressed the blade against Elizabeth's throat and whispered, "Come with me. Don't make a sound, or I'll kill your family." Elizabeth froze. Mary Catherine, half awake, lay paralyzed, pretending to sleep. The room filled with silence thicker than fear. And then, Elizabeth vanished. The Smart family was, by all accounts, the picture of normalcy. Edward and Lois were deeply religious, devoted members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Their 6 children were raised with faith, discipline, and love. Elizabeth, the second oldest daughter, was shy, graceful, and loved music. At 14, she had just finished a harp recital that had filled her parents with pride. Neighbors remembered the Smarts as the kind of family who hosted barbecues, who volunteered at church, and who seemed shielded from the harshness of the world. But as dawn broke on June 5, their world collapsed. Elizabeth's bed was empty. Her pink blanket lay crumpled on the floor. And Mary Catherine, trembling, whispered what she had seen. A man with a knife. A whisper. A sister taken into the night. Panic surged through the Smart household. Lois clutched Mary Catherine as Edward frantically called 911. "Someone's taken our daughter," he cried into the phone. His voice cracked, but his urgency was unmistakable. Police arrived within minutes. Neighbors were awakened by flashing red and blue lights flooding the street. The Smart home, once a place of warmth, became a crime scene. Officers combed through the windows, the yard, and the soft dirt outside. A set of footprints trailed away from the house. Elizabeth's disappearance sent shockwaves through Salt Lake City. Parents locked their doors tighter. Children were kept closer. And the Smarts, devastated and bewildered, found themselves at the center of a nightmare. By sunrise, news stations across Utah carried the story, 14-year-old girl abducted from her home. Reporters gathered outside the Smart residence as helicopters circled overhead. Volunteers poured in from churches, schools, and neighborhoods, forming search parties that combed through canyons, fields, and abandoned houses. The FBI was called in. Posters with Elizabeth's smiling face, framed by blonde hair, appeared on every lamppost and gas station window. Her harp recital picture became a haunting symbol of innocence stolen. The Smart family made desperate public pleas. Lois Smart stood before cameras, her voice trembling but firm. "Please, whoever has our daughter, let her come home. We love her. We need her back." Yet days turned into weeks, and the trail seemed to vanish into thin air. the intruder was no stranger to the smarts. His name was Brian David Mitchell, a drifter in his late 40s who called himself Emmanuel, the prophet of God. He had once been hired by the Smart family to do odd handyman work at their home. Mitchell was a religious extremist, obsessed with visions and delusions of grandeur. Alongside his wife, Wanda Barzee, he lived a transient lifestyle, camping in the mountains, claiming divine revelations. To Mitchell, Elizabeth was not just a victim. He believed she was chosen, part of his twisted prophecy to build a new kingdom on earth. That night, as he dragged Elizabeth through the woods into the dark canyons of Utah, her world changed forever. Elizabeth was forced to walk barefoot across rocks and dirt, the knife still at her back. Her pajamas tore against branches. Each step was a mix of disbelief and terror. She had left behind the safety of her room and entered a nightmare wilderness. By dawn, Mitchell led her to a crude campsite hidden in the mountains. A tent covered in tarps, surrounded by trees that muffled her screams. There, Wanda Barzee waited. She greeted Elizabeth not with kindness, but with cold ritual. She bathed the girl, dressed her in robes, and forced her into a bizarre wedding ceremony, declaring her the wife of Mitchell. At just 14 years old, Elizabeth was bound to a man who believed he was chosen by God. Her identity, her freedom, and her childhood were stripped away. Back in Salt Lake City, the Smart family's pain grew heavier each hour. The community organized vigils, holding candles under the night sky. Elizabeth's name was spoken in prayers at churches and whispered in classrooms. America was captivated and horrified. News anchors compared her abduction to the darkest cases in history. Talk shows debated theories. Was it a family dispute? A runaway? Or a predator lurking in plain sight? Police initially chased false leads. Suspicion even fell on Richard Rickey, a handyman who had worked for the family. He was interrogated, his past crimes uncovered, and the public eyed him with suspicion. When Rickey later died in custody, some believed the truth had been buried with him. But Mary Catherine, the only witness, remembered something. Weeks after the abduction, she recalled the man's voice. It wasn't Rickey. It was someone else. Someone the family had once trusted. As summer faded into fall, the search widened. Posters turned weathered. Leads dried up. And yet, Elizabeth was still out there, hidden in plain sight, often only miles away from her own home. The unanswered questions haunted everyone. How could a girl be taken from her bed without anyone stopping it? Why couldn't the police find her, even with national attention? And what horrors was she enduring in captivity? The answers would come, but only after months of unimaginable suffering. This is a real story. Every fact you hear is public. You can check it yourself. If real-life mysteries leave you breathless, subscribe now to MysteryPlaybacksSeries. Because the truth that truly haunts might be closer than you think. Elizabeth, chained and dressed in disguise, sat by a campfire under the Utah sky. The mountains loomed above, silent witnesses to her suffering. Mitchell whispered scriptures, Barzee prepared strange meals, and Elizabeth silently prayed for freedom. Back home, her parents left the porch light on every night, hoping their daughter would see it and return. But as the weeks stretched into months, that light seemed to grow dimmer, and hope felt further away. The days after her abduction blurred into each other. For Elizabeth, every sunrise meant survival, and every nightfall meant dread. Brian David Mitchell forced her into strict rituals. She was hidden away in robes and veils that covered her face, her identity erased. To anyone passing nearby, she looked like a young woman in religious clothing, never a missing child. Mitchell claimed that God had chosen Elizabeth to be his wife. He preached long sermons about prophecy, obedience, and divine missions. Elizabeth, though terrified, remained quiet. She quickly realized that silence might be her only weapon. Barzee, the woman Elizabeth had once hoped would protect her, became an enforcer. She cooked, cleaned, and stood by Mitchell's delusions. Sometimes she showed flickers of sympathy, but more often she was complicit, treating Elizabeth as less than human. The girl who once played harp concerts now lived chained to a tree in the wilderness. Meanwhile, the Smart family was drowning in despair. Edward and Lois pleaded daily with the media. Press conferences became routine. Every time a lead surfaced, cameras followed, and the Smarts prayed it would bring Elizabeth home. But instead, rumors swirled. Some speculated Elizabeth had run away. Others accused the family of knowing more than they admitted. Each headline stung like a blade. Neighbors who once rallied in support began whispering doubts. Police struggled under public pressure. And Mary Catherine, the little sister who had witnessed the abduction, carried guilt heavier than any child should bear. She remembered the voice of the intruder but couldn't name him. At night, she cried quietly, replaying that moment again and again. Mitchell believed he was untouchable. By disguising Elizabeth, he walked with her in public. They visited libraries, wandered through streets, and even attended gatherings. Elizabeth, hidden beneath layers of robes, was invisible in plain sight. Several times, people stared at her, sensing something unusual, but no one intervened. Fear, politeness, and disbelief blinded them. For Elizabeth, each outing was both torture and hope. Could she cry for help? Could someone recognize her? But Mitchell's knife, his threats to kill her family, echoed in her mind. Silence became survival. As months passed, the story grew beyond Utah. National news outlets made Elizabeth's face a familiar image across America. Talk shows interviewed experts on abduction psychology. Volunteers handed out flyers as far as California. The Smart family refused to give up. They hired private investigators. They held vigils where hundreds gathered with candles, singing hymns. Elizabeth's mother, Lois, often stood before crowds, her voice cracking but resolute. "My daughter is alive. And she will come home." Her unwavering faith became both a shield and a burden. Every time weeks passed without news, critics called it false hope. But Lois never wavered. In captivity, Elizabeth learned to endure. She obeyed outwardly but never surrendered inwardly. She prayed constantly, clutching to her faith. She thought of her harp, her school, her siblings. Mitchell tried to brainwash her, telling her that escape was impossible, that her family would die if she resisted. But Elizabeth's mind remained strong. She imagined the porch light at home, still burning. She promised herself she would see it again. Months into the ordeal, Mary Catherine bolted upright in her bed one night. She remembered. The voice, the face, it was Brian David Mitchell, the handyman their family had once hired. Terrified yet determined, she told her parents. The Smarts rushed to the police with this revelation. Finally, there was a name. Finally, a direction. But there was a problem. Mitchell had no permanent address, no steady work, and lived like a ghost on the fringes of society. Police struggled to track him. Still, the Smarts clung to this new lead as hope rekindled. As winter came, the mountains grew colder. Snow blanketed the canyons, and Elizabeth endured freezing nights under flimsy coverings. Her hands turned raw, her body weak. Mitchell and Barzee dragged her from camp to camp, setting up makeshift shelters, often only miles from where people searched for her. Several times, search parties passed within shouting distance. Elizabeth could hear dogs barking, men's voices calling her name. Her heart pounded with the urge to scream. But Mitchell's threats rang louder in her mind. If she called out, her family would die. So, she stayed silent, aching, trembling, but alive. In Salt Lake City, frustration boiled over. Weeks turned into months with no answers. Some neighbors accused the Smarts of hiding secrets. Others turned on law enforcement, demanding accountability. For the family, grief turned into resilience. They created the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, spreading awareness and pushing to keep Elizabeth's story alive in the media. Even as hope thinned for many, Edward and Lois refused to let their daughter be forgotten. One of the most haunting aspects of Elizabeth's captivity was how often she was seen. Mitchell paraded her in public, covered in layers, claiming she was his wife. They visited restaurants, walked city streets, and even encountered police officers. On one occasion, a detective questioned Mitchell directly. But Mitchell spoke with religious conviction, claiming Elizabeth was his daughter or wife, hidden for modesty. Elizabeth remained silent, eyes downcast, heart pounding. No one recognized her. The girl on every news station, every missing poster, was right in front of them, and still invisible. By early 2003, Elizabeth had been missing for 9 months. Her captivity had stretched from summer into spring. Her parents still spoke on television, urging the public not to forget. Mary Catherine's memory of Mitchell grew stronger, and police finally began circulating his sketch. Slowly, the public started connecting the dots. Some recognized the drifter, recalling his rant about prophecy, his wild eyes, his homeless wanderings. And soon, the walls around Mitchell and Barzee began to close. Elizabeth sat by a campfire one cold night, her thin robes barely protecting her from the wind. She stared at the flames, whispering silent prayers, her body frail but her spirit unbroken. In the distance, Mitchell ranted about visions of conquest. Barzee hummed quietly, detached from the cruelty unfolding before her. Elizabeth clung to one truth: she was still alive. And as long as she breathed, there was hope. This is a real story. Every fact you hear is public. You can check it yourself. If real-life mysteries leave you breathless, subscribe now to @MysteryPlaybacksSeries. Because the truth that truly haunts might be closer than you think. By March of 2003, Elizabeth had been missing for 9 long months. The Smarts refused to let her case fade. They pushed harder, and the police finally circulated updated sketches of Brian David Mitchell. The drawings spread quickly, on television, newspapers, and posters. Mitchell's odd appearance was unforgettable: scraggly beard, wild eyes, barefoot wanderer's clothes. People across Utah began to recognize him. And then, the phone call started. Witnesses reported seeing Mitchell walking with a veiled young woman. Some claimed the girl matched Elizabeth's build and height. Each call breathed life into the fading hope. The net was tightening. Mitchell grew reckless. He believed his mission was untouchable, his divine calling unstoppable. With Elizabeth and Barzee by his side, he walked boldly into Salt Lake City, roaming busy streets in broad daylight. Elizabeth was disguised, her face hidden by a heavy veil, her body wrapped in robes. She had been coached to remain silent. But inside, her heart pounded. She was back among crowds, back in the city where her face was still plastered on every wall. And then, fate intervened. 2 citizens spotted Mitchell, Barzee, and the veiled girl. Something in their gut told them the truth: this wasn't just a drifter family, it was them. They dialed 911. March 12, 2003. A police officer approached Mitchell on a busy street. "Sir, what's your name?" Mitchell gave his usual rehearsed answers, claiming the girl was his daughter, cloaked for religious reasons. But officers pressed harder. They had seen the sketch. They had heard the tips. And the girl's silence was too heavy, too strange. Finally, one officer turned to the veiled figure. His voice softened. "Elizabeth, is that you?" Elizabeth froze. Her throat tightened. Mitchell's threats thundered in her mind: if she spoke, her family would die. But then, she looked into the officer's eyes. She saw safety. She saw escape. She whispered, barely audible, "Yes. I'm Elizabeth." The world shifted. The officers separated Mitchell and Barzee immediately. Elizabeth was taken into protective custody. For 9 months, she had lived in fear, chained, disguised, silenced. But in that moment, freedom surged back into her lungs. News spread like wildfire. Elizabeth Smart found alive. The nation erupted in relief and shock. Families wept in front of their televisions. Strangers lit candles in celebration. And at home, the Smarts' prayers were answered. When Elizabeth returned home, the reunion was raw and emotional. Her mother clutched her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Edward whispered prayers of thanks, his hands trembling. Her siblings surrounded her, afraid to let go. Elizabeth, thin but alive, smiled faintly through the tears. She had been gone 276 days. And yet, against all odds, she was back. Her family's porch light, left burning every night, had finally guided her home. Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee were arrested. Mitchell ranted in court, quoting scripture and declaring himself a prophet. Barzee wept but stood accused as an accomplice. Years later, Mitchell was sentenced to life in federal prison. Barzee received 15 years and was eventually released in 2018, sparking public outrage. Elizabeth, though scarred by trauma, refused to let her captors define her life. She became an advocate, speaking publicly about child safety, abduction, and survival. She founded the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, dedicating her voice to protecting others. In interviews, Elizabeth has spoken with courage about her ordeal. She described how fear once silenced her, how Mitchell's control was built on threats, and how hope, tiny but unbreakable, kept her alive. I was 14. I was a child. But I survived. And no one will ever take my voice away again. Her words turned pain into power. Her story, once whispered in terror, became a call for justice and awareness worldwide. The kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart left haunting questions that still echo. How could a girl be paraded in public, yet remain unseen? Why did it take 9 months, when she was often so close to home? And how many other children, without national attention, vanish without a trace? The answers remain unsettling. But Elizabeth's return proved one truth: even in the darkest silence, hope can survive. Salt Lake City at night. The Smart family home, lights glowing warmly in the windows. The porch light, once a beacon of hope, still burns against the dark. Elizabeth, older now, steps outside. She looks at the sky, the same stars that watched her in captivity. Her voice echoes softly. I came home. I survived. And I will never stop fighting for those still missing. Have you come across this story before? What do you think truly occurred during those long months of silence? If stories like this intrigue you, subscribe now to MysteryPlaybacksSeries. Because every week, we expose the lies in every mystery with the truth. Don't stop here. Watch the next story on your screen, or step into our full playlist of real crimes and haunting mysteries. The next playback might just shake you to your core.